Good afternoon. I feel like the priest on Sunday morning. Good afternoon. There we go. I'm Jim Fermani, and I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning here at Marquette. And on behalf of the CTL and the Office of the Provost, I really want to thank everyone for joining us here this afternoon. It's very heartwarming. It's a really wonderful time of the year to have a joyous event like this. And special thanks to Alec, who's playing us beautiful holiday music, so I appreciate that. He came down from Chicago. So I have some very short remarks, and most of them are thank yous. And I'm very sincere when I'm sending out a lot of these thank yous here. We're particularly grateful to the Haggerty Museum of Art, their staff, Susan, and saying yes to the invitation to collaborate with us on this book, as well as co-hosting this event with us. So thank you for that. A very special shout out to Haggerty's curator for academic engagement, Lynn Schumo, who's not only a friend, but whose constant support and guidance helped make this book aesthetically as beautiful as I'm sure you can all agree it is. We're also enormously grateful to the Marquette Press, and specifically press manager Maureen Kondrick, whose partnership and patience were also used to create this piece and in such a timely manner. To Michael Newbeck, Michael, where are you? There you are. Chair of the English Department at Marquette University High School, our neighbors just down the street, and our copy editor extraordinaire. His vision for this book, how it's structured, how it's laid out, is really a testament, Michael, to your imagination and to your talent. And we are so grateful for your constant support and your attention to detail. Thank you. I want to acknowledge our funder, alumnus William Burleigh, class of 1957, and the Burleigh Family Foundation, without whose support we could not have created this beautiful book that will now live as a permanent record of how Marquette faculty and instructors navigated through this historical moment. He cannot join us this evening, but he knows we are holding space and gratitude for his role in these efforts. And finally, to Father Greg Boyle, the Society of Jesus, who helped us kick off this entire process of deep reflection last January during a virtual time of gratitude. Some of you might have attended that discussion with over 80 faculty and instructors who I think really needed it at that particular time. He talked specifically about this idea of exquisite mutuality, where we obliterate the illusion that we are separate, a concept that I feel goes to the heart of this shared book of reflection during this shared historical moment. The French priest and author of The Art of Thinking, Ernest Dimnet, said this: "The object of reflection is invariably the discovery of something satisfying to the mind, which was not there at the beginning of the search." St. Ignatius of Loyola said the goal of the spiritual life is to choose what better leads us to God's deepening life in me. And according to Psalm 77, I will remember my song in the night, I will meditate with my heart, and my spirit ponders. I say all of this to suggest that the active life rests on a foundation of reflection. We are here today to celebrate the contributions of Marquette faculty and instructors who said yes to our invitation that we extended to reflect on teaching during a global pandemic, a new emergence of racial reckoning, and continued challenges in higher education in multiple realms. As I reflect on March of 2020 and the subsequent months of supporting faculty in their pivot to remote teaching and the ways in which we hopefully offered moments of self-care, there are two things that come to mind. One, the desire that we did all of that with care and compassion. And two, how extraordinary the partnerships and collaborations were with the people on this campus. Marquette is full of incredibly kind, generous, and faith-filled individuals. And I mean that in all of our celebration of faith and all of its diversity that we find here. At the CTL, we are charged with supporting the pedagogical practices of faculty and all instruction, all while lifting the mission of the institution as a Catholic Jesuit university. There was no more explicit, action-oriented expression of this identity than what we experienced these last 18 months. This book is a manifestation of those relationships, and we hope that it will forever mark a moment in time when we lived our identity in the most explicit way possible. And now it's time to hand the program over to the person who, in my mind, deserves most of the credit for this project, coming to life. Dr. Melissa Hsu is the CTL Senior Fellow and Philosophy Faculty, and I don't know, Melissa, honestly, if I ever met anybody as passionate, energetic, or committed to this institution and to the faculty within it than you. This idea came to us on a little boat, as you'll read in the book. Melissa and I had to get away last summer, and we went out on Lake Michigan very early in the morning over a cup of coffee. And we attempted to escape quarantine, if only for a moment. And voila, here we are. And so I can never really truly express my gratitude for your leadership on this project that brought us here today. And now I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, so I have the fun part. So I get to turn it over to all the contributors of the book. Not all, because let me be very clear. Almost everyone volunteered to read an excerpt to talk about their chapter, and I was so thankful that they said yes again. And I have a tip for anyone wanting to put together a book at Marquette University. Ask any of the contributors, because in the middle of the pandemic, they stuck to a deadline. They wrote their booties off. That's for the kids right there. And they wrote with great heart, compassion, and smarts. And for that, we are so grateful and honored to celebrate you today. So thank you very much. Now, some contributors are going to come on up and speak for 1 to capped at 2 minutes, and they know this. And we are honored to hear all the voices. We really wanted this event to celebrate the contributors. So as you notice, you can kind of walk through the book around here. The first page of every chapter is on display with the section header and the artwork. And this is because we wanted to let the voices of the contributors shine. So without further ado, and this will go for about 18 to 20 minutes. If you want to come in and out, you can. But we're going to hear the voices of our contributors now. So without further ado, we will start with section 1, Be Still, and we will have 2 short readings here. The first, I'm very honored to say, will be by Caroline Ose, from her distinct vantage point in the Office of International Education, from her chapter called The Vocation of the International Educator in this moment. Caroline, please come on up.
Good evening, everyone. So my reason for writing this piece stemmed from a difficult reality facing international education. Unfortunately, the political and racial divides within our country, combined with a global pandemic, have created a perfect storm, if you will, that has taken a direct hit at international education. For my department, the Office of International Education, the storm intensified due to the university cuts in January of 21. Simply put, things were quite grim and very uncertain. Then came Jen and Melissa's email looking for contributors for a book titled On the Vocation of the Educator in This Moment. As they say, timing is everything. I'd like to share a paragraph. By listening to my international students on March 6th, my students provided me with a new perspective that took me out of my isolated box. They provided me with a brief snapshot of what it was like for them, to empathize with what they were going through, and to begin to understand this new virus from a different point of view. When I invited my students to talk, it was with a somewhat arrogant belief that I understood more than they did and could help. In my attempts to reassure them that OIE and the university would be there to support them through this situation, they in turn provided me with insight. This situation led to a very empowering opportunity. I could choose not to listen and to continue to presume to know better. Or I could choose to listen, assess, and act. How I looked at our current situation completely changed that day. The ability to take in and learn from someone who has a different culture, speaks a different language, or simply perceives differently is critical in a globalized world where we all need to interact to thrive. Thank you.
Wow, it's great to hear these words aloud and to meet so many of you I've never met before and just know by email. So beautiful. Thank you, Caroline. Next we have Mary Carlson from the College of Education, whose good humor and even gooder heart are on full display in her chapter called What I Learned on My COVID-19 Vacation. Mary, come on up.
The fall of 2020 was the lowest point in my teaching career since my first year teaching in 1978. I was then assigned to a middle school special ed classroom, which was, I'm pretty sure, one of Dante's circles of hell. The previous teacher had left under somewhat mysterious and chaotic circumstances, and most of the students' records were missing. That should have been a hint as to what kind of a year it was going to be. But, I was undaunted. I was well-trained. I was committed. I had high expectations, and I knew how to love students. So, I thought, I am ready for this, and I can love them through anything. That love was tested in the first 10 minutes. One of the first students who entered was the singularly most hyperactive child I have ever met. In the first 5 minutes, he knocked over furniture and books. He threw all of the name cards, which I had lovingly made, on the floor as he skipped around the room. He kept up an unbroken string of speech, including repeated requests to use a stapler while warning me that he had stapled both himself and other people in the past. Special ed teachers are trained to be like ninjas, to be one step ahead of whomever we are facing. If one strategy doesn't work, we go to our tool belts and try another one until we find the one that works. I used everything I had on the kid before 10 a.m. and it all failed. By the end of the day, I was throwing candy towards his assigned seat like puppy treats, trying in vain to try and get him to at least hover in one area. If I told you that he had been banned from every grocery store in that city because he so aggressively smelled the produce, or that he delighted in the fact that he shocked people because when he ate too much beta-carotene, his skin turned orange, and he looked like an Oompa Loompa, you probably wouldn't believe me, but it's true.
Thank you, Mary, for seeing the humor and the struggle in all these times. All right, now we're moving on to section 2, which is called Be Engaged. And it's my honor to call up Michelle Rodriguez from the Department of Social and Cultural Sciences, who also recently gave a brilliant TEDx talk on decolonizing primatology. You should ask her about it. And she wrote a chapter for this book called Reflecting on Our Humanity, Compassionate Pedagogy During and After COVID-19. Thank you, Michelle.
All right, I'm going to read an excerpt from a section entitled Compassionate Pedagogy During a Global Pandemic. This approach was flexible to the disruptions students dealt with during COVID-19. The pandemic brought changes to students' lives, from increased mental health challenges, changing social configurations, conflicts living with parents, and greater financial strains, to severe illness and death among loved ones. Removing late penalties and allowing submission of late work allowed for flexibility. The knowledge that making up work required just submitting the work, rather than feeling the pressure to do well, made it easier for students who were overwhelmed with catching up. When I met with students who fell behind, they demonstrated enthusiasm for their learning and engagement with the material. When they submitted their materials, they were reflective about how and why they fell behind. One student succinctly explained why this approach worked in their self-assessment. I love the way this class is set up because it allows me to not feel overwhelmed because I have a lot of other things going on. It also motivates me to get things done. You are by far the most understanding professor I've ever had, and I appreciate you so much. During these unprecedented times, I am beyond grateful for how your class is set up. Ultimately, what worked well was that critical self-assessment fed into the goals of the class, understanding what it means to be human. This central question requires reflection and meaning-making. Creative, non-traditional pedagogy opened the door for students to think expansively in answering this question, particularly at a time when all of our lives were appended by circumstances, requiring us to find new ways to connect to one another. Affirming our shared humanity was central to surviving the stress and uncertainty of the pandemic. Thank you.
You can see why her chapter is in the section called Be Engaged. Now it's my pleasure to call up Marcella Kearns from the Digital Media and Performing Arts Department, who discusses the ways that theater at Marquette and around the world were disrupted in her chapter that should win a title for Most Magnificent Chapter, called Between Each Moment, Infinite Expanse.
Hi everyone, I just would love to provide a bit of context. I'm an adjunct here and I straddle the Milwaukee theater community, so I was brought in as, I love being here too. I was brought in as a replacement director last year for a production that went to streaming. So ultimately, we were never sure if anyone saw what we did. It's true. So I'd just like to read a little bit about what that quandary was. Theater makers by trade dance with the impossible, but the spread of COVID-19 confronted us with an existential threat by severing us from the most fundamental ingredient of our art. The theater, a collaboration of producer, director, designers, builders, actors, and crew crafting a playwright story in real time and space, amounts to a brand of magic when activated by its crowning element, the presence of an audience. What then do storytellers do when the alchemy of that relationship is disrupted, when there's no hope that an audience's presence will add the story's final spark, that communion that gives it life, and the reason for which the art is crafted in the first place? How, moreover, do they embark upon a process with no guarantee that they or their community will last long enough in health and safety to allow them to reach a completed product? Every moment, every day we rehearsed, we weren't sure if we would get to the end. So I'll let you read the chapter to find out what we did.
Thank you. I do strongly recommend reading the rest of that chapter. It's a page turner. All right, we're moving on now to section 3, which is called Be Transformed. And it is my pleasure to welcome Erin Hoekstra from the Department of Social and Cultural Sciences, speaking on behalf of her and her co-author, Lorianne Klockow, in Biomedical Sciences, about their chapter called Addressing the COVID-19 Infodemic Through Media Literacy Education. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, everyone. When everything shut down in March 2020, 3 Marquette faculty members, Lorianne Klockow in Biomedical Sciences, who's in the back, Joseph Bionaby in Health and Biomedical Sciences, and myself in Social and Cultural Sciences, decided to co-create and teach a course on the public health approach to the pandemic. The course was originally developed and taught right at the very beginning of the pandemic. This was before the creation, before the availability of vaccines even. In this time, if you recall, This time of uncertainty, this time of life being upended, our role as educators was very much one of co-learners with our students, as knowledge about the virus, the effects of the pandemic were changing so rapidly. To our consternation, the pandemic became increasingly politicized and misinformation about COVID proliferated. Seeking to address this infodemic, as it's called, a fundamental part of our course focused on equipping students with the knowledge and the skills to identify and challenge misinformation about the pandemic. Research has shown that young people ages 18 to 24 are more susceptible to believing inaccurate information about COVID. This, through a series of assignments and hands-on activities, we supported students to learn how to find and test sources about the pandemic for their accuracy and reliability, in the hopes of cutting through the inaccurate and politically polarized information that has accompanied the pandemic. We believe, and our experience teaching this course has demonstrated, that having the skills to navigate both the pandemic and the infodemic so that we can process this shared crisis together is important to educators and students alike. Thank you.
Some strong themes of collaboration are emerging, right? Across units, with colleagues, with students, working it out together. Now it's my pleasure to welcome John Metz from the Theology Department, who writes vocationally about the relationship between individuals and communities in his chapter, The Paradox of Isolation When Caring for the Common Good During a Global Pandemic. Welcome, John.
Thank you. When they asked about this moment, what were we doing in this moment, and how are we going to articulate that? I thought of, I will write just about a moment. And I wrote about a moment in January of 2021 when I was teaching a class called the 4929, which is the culminating experience of the core, in which students look back on their Marquette experience and look forward to where they're going. And I was assigned to teach, because of COVID, in the varsity theater, which is a beautiful room. It's very difficult to have any kind of discussion in there. So I wrote about a moment that I was standing on a 6-foot-high stage with theater lights on me, with a 50-foot-high screen, 1,000-seat theater, and I looked out on 30 students that were all wearing masks, and if the guys were wearing hats, I could only see 2 inches of their faces, and they were separated by at least 12 feet from one another. And I looked out at the audience, which I call them in my chapter, and I said, this is the loosest definition of a classroom that I can ever imagine. And I thought, I was inspired by Father Greg Boyle about being connected, and that is what our goal was. And I thought, how are we going to connect in this moment? And in that moment, I immediately thought, we're going to have to change what we do. And what hit me was that what we were doing to care for the common good was exactly what was isolating us from one another. So it was a paradox. We did stuff to care for one another, but it separated us from one another also. So we had to venture into that loneliness. And we all did, everyone did that, but we ventured out transformed, and we got creative, and we thought of virtual discussion groups and all sorts of cool things, but there was a moment that I felt like I had made a horrible, horrible mistake in choosing teaching when I was looking out at the sea of empty chairs sweating under the lights. So that's what my chapter is about. Thank you.
Meet Marcella Kearns. She might have some ideas for you. Thank you, John. Thank you. All right. I did not see Megan Hader. Are you here? Is she here? Thank you. Okay, I apologize I didn't catch you earlier. Megan Heater is also in the theology department, and she writes about teaching in Marquette's Educational Opportunity Program in her chapter, Building Community in the Virtual COVID Classroom. Thank you, Megan.
So this book project began for me with Father Greg Boyle's presentation on kinship, which, if you've read his text, is a major theme of his work and of what he understands to be his vocation. And reflecting on kinship was a really powerful experience in light of my teaching that summer prior, having things be transitioned online very suddenly, as we all experienced. And I'm a graduate student in theology, so at the time that happened, I was in my own suddenly transitioned online intensive language course, learning some do's and don'ts from the professor who we were all learning with. The theme of co-learning was present. But Father Boyle's theme of kinship really showed up in what I chose to do with my class, and having students share and tell stories about themselves and what had brought them to Marquette for the first 5 minutes of class every day. And that was a really pivotal experience for our class community. It became kind of a blueprint for my own teaching as I hopefully very successfully finish my PhD and become a professor. And there's a beautiful moment of reunion and kinship at the end of my chapter that really brings full circle and bookends the theme of kinship that Father Boyle started, at least for me, this project with. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to have my work present in this beautiful book.
And it really is so good to meet some people in person who I haven't met before. You know, it's like, no, I'm meeting you in real life, not just our team's life. So Megan came to writing sessions that we hosted that, you know, kept everyone on track and just wrote with a great big heart and a lot of smarts. And thank you so much. Okay, it is my pleasure now to welcome Sumana Chattopadhyay. Yes. Thank you. In the Department of Digital Media and Performing Arts. She talks about how she engaged students near and far in her chapter, Teaching in the Middle of a Pandemic, How a Challenge to Teach Differently Reinvigorated My Teaching. Thank you.
So as you can hear, a lot of my colleagues talked about transformation, you know. And so my chapter is indeed about resilience and transformation in my teaching during this pandemic, which happened through collaboration with my students. So if you don't know, I was also academic senate chair at that time, and then I was presented with this idea that I had to teach all these hybrid courses where some folks were in person, some folks were online. Then next semester I had to divide them into 2 groups. And I was teaching a couple of classes on television where I used to have a lot of lectures and then viewings in class and discussions. So I had to come up with a whole new idea of how I could do it online. So I made a lot of changes through D12, and I'm just going to read some of the lessons I learned through the process. So kind of ending my chapter, because I talked a lot about strategy earlier. So if you want to know more, please read it, but I'm going to read a little bit of excerpt from my chapter. Okay. This pandemic has highlighted the systemic inequities that exist in society and within the student population, and it has also brought to the fore the mental health challenges with which current students are grappling. These realities have made me renew my commitment to practice grace, not only during this year of pandemic teaching, but also to continue practicing it in a post-pandemic world, because sometimes all a student needs to be successful is someone willing to empathize with them. Going forward, I hope to make this the cornerstone of my teaching. I also intend to continue being a resilient teacher by continuing to adapt to future changes and disruptions in the learning and social environments to better facilitate student learning. As this pandemic has shown, disruptions and change can be good, and none of the innovations in my teaching discussed in this piece would have happened without the COVID-19 pandemic. I would have continued teaching my courses the way I normally do, with more lecture-based learning and some TV viewing during our time in the classroom. I would not have redesigned my curricula in both TV classes to include more days when students would be asked to watch full TV episodes that broaden their perspectives about television, and I would not have designed these immersive assignments. What started out as a year laden with anxieties about what pandemic teaching would entail and whether my students and I would be able to adapt to this new normal, ended up becoming a year of learning and growth for me and my students. It was a collaborative story of resilience and adaptation. In the face of crisis, it left us wiser and hopefully better. As Haruki Murakami writes, and once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over, but one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. That's what this storm is all about. Thank you for listening.
I must confess, I love hearing your voice after you've managed so many other people's voices over the past year as chair of Academic Senate. So thank you so much. All right, we are in the home stretch here. We are going to turn to section 4, which is called Be Connected. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome Mahmoud Watkins, who's going to speak on behalf of both his co-authors, and who teaches in the EPP program at Marquette. So he's going to speak on behalf of Teresa Tobin, Mirasola I practiced this, Shalili, all right, I think. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. And it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to talk about your chapter called Educating for Liberation, Teaching Philosophy as a Practice of Radical Kinship. Thank you, Mahmoud.
Well, as a person of Islamic faith, we always start off by saying a lot of things we do with the word Bismillah, which means in the name of Allah, or the name of God. And for all those other Islamic faith out there, I said, Assalamu alaikum too. You know, peace of God be upon you and all you all too. It was 3 parts to this that I was told. Is that how you came to teaching in the pandemic, and you know, where do you go from here? So I'll just highlight the part about how I came to teaching. And like that, I think it's good.
I don't think so.
Oh yeah, I am kind of tall.
I am too. You got me.
Y'all needed a mic before.
They know me well. All right. It says, if not now, when? If not me, who? It says, I guess I have been on the path of being an educator for quite a while. However, I ran from this and had a fervent denial of it. During this time, I obtained my GED. I was enrolled in college offered at the prison, and I read on an average 3 books a week, a practice I continued until my release from prison. For the first 10 years of my prison sentence, I listened, read, and went to school. I did this until I felt I had an informed enough opinion to participate in at least some of the conversations that the learned inmates participated in. This began my sharing of my opinion and pedagogy, so to say. I began having conversations with a chosen few of the inmates about any and all subjects, and did it with power, clarity, and authority. Before reading so much, I knew what I wanted to say in my mind, but could not articulate the same with my words. Reading books taught me the art of expression, and reading over so many subjects, I learned a lot of the ways to articulate my thoughts and feelings in an intelligent way. Now, why run from or have a fervent denial of teaching? Well, I was taught in school that Christopher Columbus discovered America. And as a student or a teacher, if we did not stick to this fake narrative, then we were wrong. I did not want those constraints. It was that simple. However, I was asked by friends, family members, and instructors if I would consider teaching as a profession. At those times, I would respond with my Columbus spiel. It was my go-to answer. No one could be bogus and deny that truth. However, Rodney McClain, an instructor at Milwaukee Area Technical College, shared something that I could not be bogus about and deny. He said, "Watkins, when you are in class, what are you doing? Are you not answering questions and adding commentary from the many books you read, as well as your lived experience?" I replied, "Yes." He asked, "Is not that teaching?" I thought for a few seconds. "Yes." Then he said, "Why not get paid for it then?" At that moment, the light bulb lit up. So when this opportunity came up, I didn't run from it. I ran to it.
Thank you, Mahmoud. And their chapter does a really beautiful job of showing how 3 different people with 3 different stories can arrive in a shared place with a love of learning and teaching and compassion. Thank you. All right. It's my honor to invite up Scott Dale, from the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, who will speak about his chapter called Teaching Spanish Culture in a Pandemic. There's an image from his chapter on display there. So Scott, please come on up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Collaborating with Melissa and Jen was a fantastic experience. They made the whole process a breeze. Special thanks to Melissa, who sent me an email way back when with the suggestion, how about a concise and clear title for your essay? So thank you, Melissa. I think at the time, my original title was maybe the 2nd longest sentence in the whole essay. So, this is just really brief. So how am I going to shift my in-person Spanish culture class to a completely online format by next week? And I remember the hot flashes at night in early spring in 2020. I felt like I was cornered. And I remember asking myself, in the middle of this episode, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I am totally unprepared. I felt like a mechanic without tools. I was trained to do this. How am I going to get out of this? So indeed, the COVID pandemic shook me to the core, not only professionally, but as an individual. Teaching is a big part of my identity. I truly felt immobilized. However, the circumstances and consequences of this pandemic also forced me to re-examine my vocation, social behavior, human psychology, pedagogy, core values, priorities, and more importantly, my own passion for the profession. The unintended consequences of the pandemic eventually helped me adapt to new learning technologies, reminded me to focus on the core purpose of my Spanish culture class, and enlightened me about what was apparently elusive, yet so obvious at the same time: the importance of community in the social fabric of our world today. Having empathy for one another, understanding our common fears, and helping one another in times of need are all core values that emerged during this pandemic. While my Spanish culture class shed light on the themes of love, religion, family, and war in the history of Spain, the pandemic also reminded us just how fundamental a sense of community is to the human spirit. As Arthur Brooks reminds us, the pandemic shed light on how we may all have our differences, but as we can now better understand, we actually have a lot of common similarities as well. Teaching during this pandemic and using new technologies taught me one very valuable lesson. Our students may be vulnerable learners during a pandemic, but they can also appreciate a well-designed curriculum focusing on the complexities and strengths of our humanity and the importance of community and solidarity. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll finish up this section with one reading, and then we will have a special, it's for the appendix called Vocation by Michael Dante. But first, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Litha Miles Edmondson, who's a longtime librarian in the Rainer Memorial Libraries. She discusses how she supported students as they returned home. What a task that was. And what the pandemic laid bare about unequal access to information and resources in her chapter called The Digital Divide Amplified: Information Access in College Students During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Thank you, Litha.
Thank you, Melissa. I feel like part of this chapter is hers, the way she pushed me and gave me quite a bit of feedback. And I also want to thank the copy editor, because after I read that chapter, I thought, who wrote that? So I'm just going to read from the beginning and the end, and I'll leave it to you all to get the meat of it from actually reading the chapter. So a Jesuit and a historian right on this campus, upon learning that I was a librarian, expressed that he viewed the academic library and chapel as the wings by which our institution soars. The COVID-19 pandemic threatened to clip one of those wings, but librarians and library staff were able to pivot to meet the needs of community members. As a research and instructional services librarian, my primary concern was that the pandemic would exacerbate existing barriers and create new barriers to access for information for students, faculty, and staff. When the entire state shut down, the campus library, which is considered an essential service, was one of the last public buildings on campus to close. As a mid-career librarian, I provide reflections about how college students encounter barriers to using the library fully. I was able to witness the ways that the COVID-19 pandemic laid bare the needs for more equitable access to library materials. Using my professional skills and observations led me to a conclusion. The digital divide continues to disadvantage students who experience the greatest barriers to accessing information. In short, I saw the digital divide exacerbated at its intersections with information literacy and information privilege. In my conclusion, I returned to the wings, particularly that clipped wing. In a new place, a new country, a new kind of institution, or a new campus post-pandemic, a campus library should remain a low-stress and supportive environment that supports the student-scholar journey at any stage. Because libraries are integral parts of the landscape of campuses, it is only natural that we remain a strong force. And this is how we soar. Create environments that meet the needs of many learners by partnering with the library. I'm talking to all of you. Encourage our students to engage with the library. Students, Kyle, he's in my area, so he's a political science student, and yes, thank you, Kyle. Partner with the librarians when selecting resources so that we can ensure equitable access to appropriate resources. And that means when you are creating these assignments, reach out to us so that we can make sure that we are fully exploring the resources that we have available to you. Nurture libraries as they strive to be diverse and inclusive learning environments. Realize that anytime we serve marginalized students, that is when we get takeoff. And lastly, incorporate Ignatian values and pedagogical practices in libraries library offerings, and other campus offerings. Thank you.
Finally, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Michael Dante, who, I've got to say, I've gotten to know Michael a little bit over the past 2 years or so. And I know when he sends an email saying, you know, Jennifer and Melissa, I have an idea. It is the 500th year of it. And I said, we are in, Michael. Yes, please. So he wrote an appendix to this book, and the appendix is called The Ignatian. What it offers all readers are short reflections about Ignatius's life, followed by some questions for both educators and even administrators, those of you who are still here, about how to connect Ignatius's life to our mission that we're charged with at this university. So Michael, thank you so much for agreeing to speak, and please bring us home.
There's something powerful about story. It fires the imagination and stirs our hearts. And it's now 6 o'clock. I have a talking watch that tries to keep me on time. But about story, fires the imaginations, captures and touches the human heart. In the midst of a global pandemic, with so much disruption, space, time, relationships, crisis, much seems lost. Our direction, our purpose, and our way of proceeding. And it's times like this we can cultivate our inner eye and return back to those sources of others that encountered crises, challenges, and disruptions. In working at Marquette, a Catholic and Jesuit institution, we don't have far to look. The founder, Ignatius of Loyola, suffered his own tragic cannonball moment where his life was completely upended. And they offer his story not only to inform us, but also to inspire us, to reflect deeply on our own stories. How have we been transformed, opened, and changed as a result of this pandemic? And so these 5 vignettes, good key pivotal moments in his life, and they invite us to look at those moments in our lives as people and as educators. So I feel very humbled to share these reflections and grateful for Jennifer and Melissa's openness to include this as a way not only for our own personal reflection, but also to deepen our call and our vocation to teach and research here at Marquette. Thank you.